Welcome to Writers Talking, the podcast where we take writers and readers behind the scenes, sharing the stories within the stories. No scripts, no filters, and no holds barred as we talk about what really happens for writers as they write, edit, publish, and promote their work. Hi, I'm Anjanette Fennell, agent, editor, and writerly mentor who's worked with hundreds of writers to break through their creative challenges to uncover the stories they feel compelled to share. Now, let's get talking. Emma Gray is a novelist, feature writer, photographer, professional speaker, and accountability coach. She's been writing fiction since she first fell for Anne of Green Gables at 14 and is the author of the YA novels Unrequited and Tilly Maguire and the Royal Wedding Mess, as well as I Don't Have Time, co-authored with Audrey Thomas, and the parenting memoir Wits End Before Breakfast, Confessions of a Working Mum. She wrote her first adult novel, The Last Love Note, in the wake of her husband's death. It's a fictional tribute to their love, an attempt to articulate the magnitude of her loss, and a life-affirming commitment to hope. Emma lives just outside Canberra, where her world centers on her two adult daughters, young son, loved stepchildren and step-grandchildren, writing, photography, and endlessly chasing the aurora australis. Nina D. Campbell is passionate about words and women's stories. She studied theatre and literature at university, where she's held the position of women's officer alongside notable South Australian feminists Natasha Stott-Despoja and Annabelle Crabb. As a professional writer for the Australian government, Nina wrote ministerial speeches, briefings, policy papers, and communications materials before a midlife health challenge reminded her that life was for living, not just earning a living. Having left the paid workforce, Nina now writes fiction full-time. Together with her partner Bruce and their spirited Jack Russell Terrier Molly, she lives nestled between a world-class wine region and the sparkling sea in South Australia. Nina's debut novel, Daughters of Eve, is described as an unput-downable feminist revenge thriller. It was included in the Sydney Morning Herald's list of books to look out for in 2022 and Marie Claire's top 10 reads upon its release. Rachel S. Morgan is an award-winning fiction writer, screenwriter, and emerging television showrunner. A former entertainment journalist and recipient of the Josephine Ulrich Literature Prize, her previous film and television credits include Wanted, Mako Mermaids, and The Bachelor. Rachel writes a lot of things, but has a particular penchant for drama that makes you laugh, comedy that stabs you in the feels, stuff that is high camp and scary AF, and historical fiction. If there's magic, pop stars, or vampires in the mix, all the better. She's soon to release the first book in a brand new rom-com mystery series through Daring Press and is currently developing a diverse film and television slate that includes her new dark comedy TV show, Disgraceful. Disgraceful is also her current novel work in progress because she doesn't think she has enough things on her plate. Rachel likes yoga, tattoos, and cheese, but not in that order. Mostly, the cheese comes first. Because NaNoWriMo is coming up, I thought now's a perfect time to actually talk to writers like the three of you who are all experienced. All of you have at least given NaNoWriMo a go, but it's more
No,
about...
I've never. I haven't.
You've never done it?
No.
Oh my goodness. Well, maybe you don't need it because you just do it anyway. The sort of questions I was going to have you guys dive into sharing a little bit about: how do you organize or store your ideas? And if you use any particular tool or software. So especially when you're thinking of, I've got this big goal, a goal being, even if I am a binge writer, Emma, thank you so much, because I think you've given multiple people permission to be a binge writer and you don't have to write every day. However, if you have the goal of doing something like NaNoWriMo, even if it's not in November, but a different month of the year, and you say, I've got this amount of time, I want to maximize it, I'm going to sit down on a daily basis to write. How do you choose which of those ideas? And then is there any tool you use to help you on that path?
I can jump in because I'm really strange, I think, in the way that I approach it, because it's a real feeling process for me. I feel my way into a story. I feel my way into an idea. So when I do feel the urge to sit down, it's usually a story that is pulling me towards it. And it can be a character or an image, like a sense sensory image that I get. So I don't tend to get so much of a physical image, but a sort of a sense of the atmosphere or emotion of a particular setting or interaction. And that will be what pulls me to the page initially, that I know that there's something that has kind of a beating heart, has a sense of wanting to be written. And that's what will pull me to that project. And for a long time, I used to do that thing where I tried to drag myself to write every day, and I tried to on a particular project, and I'm fairly linear. I have to work from the beginning to the end. So for me, it's about finding, and it's a really subtle sensory experience where I just go, no, I want to write this. I can feel my way into it. It feels alive. And that's usually what pulls me to the page. And initially I struggle with words. Like initially I'll be kind of, doesn't quite capture it, that doesn't quite capture it. But once I find my way into that story, it tends to flow very easily. Whenever I sit down, it comes to me and it works really well.
It's interesting. And I know, because I know each of you have multiple projects. So how does that work when you have a little bit of a feeling on one day or multiple days, but you have another one in there too, right? I know right now you have at least 2, if not 3, because there are these ideas, and maybe one is bigger and one is not as fully formed in terms of feeling or that sensory experience you're talking about. So where do they, to that other part of that question, where do you store it? Do you write it down with a pen and paper? Do you have a
I have multiple books around the place where I'll put little ideas down, but I have learned over the years that I very rarely go back to them. I think it's the act of writing that embeds it in a part of my brain that I can access later. So it is very much a sense of programming my brain. I keep them between my ears. I've tried writing things. I've got false starts of different projects that I have on my so I save each of my projects in a folder, in a writing folder, and they have, when they become something that I'm actually going to write properly, they usually get a number so that it pushes them to the top of the list.
Yeah.
And then there's something that will always stay sort of top of mind. So that's kind of one of the practical things that I have, is the way that I version control and the way that I write where I write, and I only write in Word. But because I'm so driven by that sort of sensory experience of a story to find my way into it, writing the stuff down is just kind of facts, and those facts can change as I come back to the story. I might find, so when I started this particular story, there was a girl walking down the beach, and then when I sat down to write the second chapter, I was quite surprised to find this totally different character turn up and want to be written. And I know that there's another character who's sitting in the background going, I'm coming, I'm here. And I know how I interact. I know how I get into the story. I just don't know quite where she turns up.
Ooh.
So I keep them in my mind so that they can move around.
Yeah.
And it's one of the challenges that I find when I'm talking about the book out in the world, is that for people who read the book, it's a fixed thing. It's it's words on the page that make the picture in their head, but the picture in my head morphs and changes at different times. So I know things about the characters that aren't in the book that inform what happens in the book.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes change. So it's kind of a weird world, creating them and actually making them stop.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for being so honest about how it worked for you. I think it's really hard too, because when you are in the process and doing it, you're not necessarily analyzing what your process is. Although saying that, it can be good sometimes when you're in the space between stories to have a think back and remember what worked and what didn't. And you guys know that I take writers through that process to remind you and or to reveal to you what actually works for you, as opposed to what, when you read other people, including writers that you admire, just because we admire them and we love their work, and or their voice may be similar to ours or what we aspire to, their process to get there can be totally different, right? You don't necessarily need to try on somebody else's clothes. What about you, Em or Rach? How do you organize or stir your ideas? I know how I see them because you have to communicate them to me in a particular way. But what is it like for you with your different projects? Where do they go? How do you know?
Well, it's currently quite a mess. I think I've realized in the last few months that I cannot do what I have been doing, which has been feeling all creative, following the path. I mean, before this call, I went to, I was in my novel that I'm finishing, answering some proofreading queries this weekend. And I somehow clicked out of that, and there was the final page of the children's book I'm also working on. And I thought, oh, I forgot about that, and started working on it, and it's just because it's there. And and so my attention has, it needs corralling in some way. So I recently have started using Dabble, which is one of those programs like Scrivener, but less complicated, because that's another thing I can't overcomplicate. I wouldn't use all the features that I know other writers love in Scrivener. So Dabble's sort of a more streamlined thing, which has helped me at least start to put the projects in one place, because I have historically been quite disorganized in where I store them on my computer. Version control can be a problem, all of that. So I think it's time to sort of potentially grow up in this area. I think I've got to let go of that whole romantic notion that creativity, involves a sort of messiness, because actually that's just turning into a bit of a headache. And I mean, this morning, as you alluded to before, I was proofreading, and I could hear this awful sort of noise coming out of the kitchen, and I realized I was making coffee and had forgotten to put the pot underneath the filter, and it was just all over my bench, coffee everywhere. So there needs to be something needs to change. And so that's a process that is happening at the moment, where I'm just gradually getting more and more organized in the way that I store ideas, because there are just so many. And then there's that fear that you'll forget the great ideas you've had, and to be able to come back to them and find them in one place is going to be a lot easier, I think.
I was going to ask a silly question that when I think about it, I've answered it. How can you remember something you forgot? But has that ever happened to you where you thought, I know I had this great idea and it's fully gone, but I just have a sense of it?
It tends to have gone, and then something will trigger the memory, and it's more, oh gosh, what else have I forgotten that could be potentially an idea, so
that's the anxiety. That's the anxiety talking. I don't know if it's the truth talking, but I hear you with that.
Yeah. So I'm really interested to hear what everyone else does, because I think we can always learn different ways of doing things. But as for your experience, Nina, of feeling your way into the story, I loved listening to that explanation, because it feels a bit that way to me. And I feel as though I've recently been driven by deadlines to the point where I haven't been able to explore the new story that freely. And that's what I'm really looking forward to next, is the next step.
I love that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you were talking about wanting to find a really structured way of doing it. I was thinking, yeah, I'm not sure that would work for me, because I used to keep on paper all of the ideas I had for stories, and when I go back, I look at them and they don't actually look the same. They don't have a way in for me if they're not actually immediate. So and I'm not sure whether that will or won't work for you. It'll be really interesting to find out how Dabble actually works for you. I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
That's interesting. And what about you, Rach? How do you store? And of all of these lovely writers here, I have to say, I'm pretty sure you have the greatest number of potential projects partially worked, either in script form or breaking this down, or it's there, here and there. How do you store all that, even before you get to the which one am I feeling like writing now?
I don't know whether having being the one with the most projects is a good thing.
You win. You win the most projects award.
I win it. There's so many things. I mean, yeah, I think I counted them up the other day because I have a document that is what I call my slate, which is my fiction projects and my film projects and my TV projects. And there were 38 of them.
Wow.
And that's not, and that's the ones that are vaguely fleshed out. That's not including the ones that are loose kind of ideas. So I don't think I am going to live long enough to be able to do all of them. I think I'll have to live to about 200, and I'm constantly coming up with new ideas. So I know some of them will just, fade away into memory, I guess. But I don't know. I wish I had a clear answer for my.
But maybe
it
that's
is organized. It's organized chaos. It really is. I've always been a little bit old school. I love notebooks. I have boxes around my apartment that are filled with notebooks, and each project has its own notebook. And then I have a master notebook that has all of the projects listed in it. And I have voice notes on my phone because I come up with things when I'm walking. And obviously I can't type while I'm walking. So I record voice notes. And then when I get home, depending on what project that was for, I will note that down in the notebook. I have written notes on my phone. So I have, it's not very organized at all. It's very fragmented, but there's stuff everywhere. And then I did try Scrivener. So I started using Scrivener for Disgraceful when I was working on the novel of Disgraceful, and it's very complicated, and it took so long to set up that I just found that really demanding. I've tried using Asana, which is like a Kanban board for organizing work tasks.
Yeah.
And again, that took so long to set up, and then I haven't looked at it since then, so it's useless. I find I go back to the notebooks mostly. I do have on my Mac. I have a folder for all of the projects that I've actually started working on, or that I've written a one-pager for, or a particular pitch document or an outline. Once I've actually started doing the writing, that's all on my computer. But anything that's kind of in idea form and is just percolating in my brain, it's in a notebook, and I hand write it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I find that for me is the most organic, and it feels alive in the book until it's ready to be actually on the page, I guess.
I think that's really, look, obviously I'm biased. I'm a huge stationery fiend. And so the idea of notebooks, I love. What I was really appreciative there, and I thought, oh, that would be a concept of doing the voice memo. Totally guilty, take voice memos. I have some that are many years old. I don't think I've ever listened to them again. So just the part of you taking the voice memo and then transferring it, is amazing. So well done you on that. And also thinking about, what if rather than looking at it as chaos, although it can be, but if what you're doing is processing. So Nina talked about having a lot of it just in her mind, in her internal processor. But every time we write it down, and I get this as well, I enjoy writing it down. I have multiple calendars. And I use an electronic one, and I depend on that one because I need an actual noise to tell me something is coming up, or like a reminder. But I have a month calendar and I write it down. And then I have another paper calendar that's next to it, that's a year one, that I also write it down. And I used to really internally chastise myself for all of this extra work. Number one, I actually just enjoy it, right? I choose a different colored pen. Thank you, Friction pens, for being erasable. I choose a different colored pen. I like the act of writing it, and it helps process it for me.
Well, I
And
mean, I have my diary as well, and I'm very much one for my to-do lists, and I will write on each day. I write, the name of the project I'll be working on. So if I'm working on Disgraceful, if I know I'm going to have time on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I put that at the top of each page, and it's just a little reminder that that's what I was planning on doing that day. So yeah, the to-do lists, and I think it's that act of getting it down on the page and out of your brain. And with the notebooks, it really is that, like as Nina was saying, it's that percolating. It's I've got to actually think it through to the point where I'm ready to actually write it. And that's a lot of plotting, but a lot of figuring out about the character as well. And if I haven't done that, I don't feel like I can sit and write. I'm so not a pantser. I can't work it out on the page. So
it's interesting though, isn't it? When you say you get it out of your brain and put it on paper, I'm not actually sure that's what we're doing. I've read somewhere that there's like the neuroplasticity and the way that our brains form around activities, and things that we do with our bodies have a really strong impact on that. So I've read about a guy who talked about walking, the act of standing upright and walking as human beings fundamentally changes the way that our brain wires itself, and that the act of walking is part of the act of creativity for a lot of people. Is a really interesting reflection. So also the act of journaling, there's been research done that sort of says actually writing things down moves them around in your brain, so they go to different parts of your brain.
Yes.
So I wonder if the act of writing is not about being able to come back and read it, and maybe for you, Ange, the act of speaking does the same thing. So when you speak,
they're different for me, actually. Way. So when somebody says they're having trouble with writing, or they're looking to get inspired, or they're writing, to your point, you'd said something like, that's not quite the picture, that's not quite the picture, like that's not quite it. I'll ask them to try to talk it, because that actually accesses a different part of the brain. I don't know if that's the same part of the brain as movement, but I do know that the writing and the talking are different. So if you are looking for a revelation or an aha, or just a shifting stagnant energy, sometimes doing the other that you haven't been doing, like telling someone, is where you'll get, especially in copy, by the way. So if you're looking for a title or this or that, sometimes just saying what you're talking about, they're not necessarily giving you the title or the copy or the aha, but by talking it out, all of a sudden it comes to you. But I also do a lot of that talking voice memoing while I'm walking. So those are combined. So interesting, Nina.
It is, and what you're just saying, Nina, about just neuroplasticity, or the way your brains work, or different types of movement. I don't know whether this is connected, but it made me think of this. When I'm mapping something out that's very new, or I'm trying to fathom a story, or I'm trying to get a first draft out. It was a really long time before I could do that on a computer, and I still struggle sometimes. I find, because I'm nearly 50. We all grew up in the age where handwriting was what you did, before computers. I still find, because I'm literally a two-finger typer, I'm very fast with two fingers, but it's still two-finger typing. I'm not a natural typist. So I find I often can't write a first draft straight into my computer. I have to write a lot of it by hand, because I find if I'm on my computer, I'm having to really think about what I'm doing with my finger. It's not a natural connection. I find when I'm writing by hand in a notebook, it's like there's an organic, or just organic's not the right word. It's a more perfect connection from my brain to the page. It's like I'm on autopilot, or I'm auto writing, because my hand is just moving of its own accord. So my brain is literally connected to the page. Whereas if I'm on my computer, I feel like there's a disconnect between my brain and the page, and it doesn't quite flow as well. Really, it's getting better the better I get at typing. Sorry, Ian.
Are you looking at the keyboard, Rach, or are you looking at the screen when you type?
I'm looking at the keyboard.
Yeah, see, that's because I'm a touch typist. My dad, bless his heart, for my 16th birthday bought me a type. It was called Type Quick, and it was on the old
I
word
wish I'd done
processor.
that.
And I remember thinking, wow, that's really, I mean, you also got me a watch, I think. But so it was a nice birthday. It wasn't just that. But I remember thinking, okay. And honestly, best thing he ever gave me. And so
it's one of the things I wish I knew how to do.
Yeah.
I wish I could touch type. I think it would make a huge difference.
well, because then you
You
are
can learn
looking at the
now.
story on the screen.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, look, and learning how to touch type might actually be easier, sorry, Scrivener, than learning a new computer program. Again, whatever feels fun. So for anybody wanting to use Scrivener, I had a reach out from another company recently. I'll go check them out a little bit more. I'm wary of ever recommending anything that I don't necessarily use. But having said that, I'm not quite 2 fingers. I might be like 6 fingers.
Oh, I
but
think I'm actually 4 fingers.
Yeah, like I'm not a touch typist, but that is also one of those things. And I reckon I took a typing class in high school. So I don't know how I passed it because I don't do that. But that could be a skill that may change things for you. Like we've said, between binge writing and not binge writing, if you're okay with what you're doing and you're feeling good, then keep doing that. But
it's so interesting, isn't it? I think the way that we actually pour out, because for me, typing is the one that feels the most natural because I've done so much writing professionally in my life. And I'm a touch typist because my mum wouldn't let me be unemployed. She told me I had to go and do a typing course if I was not in a job. So I learned to touch type when I finished school. And that was, like you, Emma, I'm just so grateful for it because it does make such a difference. And I often feel when I'm writing a story that I'm reading it. I'm just the first person reading it when it comes onto the page. Are you the same, Emma?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, when I had my neck injury and I was unable to type for a year, I was going absolutely crazy. And so that was, I think, when I created the rooms in my brain that I keep story in, because I just had to walk to try and dull the pain. And because I couldn't write, I had written the first draft of a book, but I couldn't actually write the adjustments that I wanted to make to grow that book. And so that book grew as I was walking around and around and around with my dog around the property that we were on at the time. And I think I tried drag and dictate and just said, no, that's not going to work. It just doesn't work for me. I have to have a keyboard. But I was talking to a friend of mine who's a psychologist who has also injured his neck and had to stop writing using a keyboard. And he said it took him about a month. And now he is so fluent writing. He writes all his reports by dictating them and then getting them typed out. And I was thinking, yeah, neuroplasticity again. You have that ability to change the way that you work in the world. So, you know, you might be able to learn to touch type, Rach, and then move on to a different, like a faster way of working in that space so that you don't have to then transcribe. But, you know, I really should get my act together and try and reteach my brain to work in that verbal form.
I'm the same as you, Nina, with verbal form, and I tried drag and dictate as well, and maybe I gave it 10 minutes of a go. I thought, this is not for me, which is clearly hopeless. So it's definitely about anything else that we ever try to do and learn to do. It's from practice, and I'm sure that we would get better at it if we gave it a proper go. And I've got friends who actually managed to write an enormous amount of words, mainly dictated, and one friend in particular who dictates in the car on the way to work every day and at lunchtime while she's walking around in the car on the way back. And she had a goal to write 1 million words in a year, and she was getting close to it.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
All through dictation.
Wow.
And yeah, another friend of mine's just started to do it, and I think I've noticed her volume increase, and I think it does make sense because that's where we first learn our relationship with words is verbally. So I think if we could re-access that, we may well become more prolific.
I think the big difference, and we've talked about this in other places too, the authors that I've talked to who've been forced to find another way. That's what you were talking about, Nina. That's what your friend experienced as well. We've had other authors on the podcast that the same thing happened. So you always have to, again, have a bit of self-compassion and see that not opting in and giving up, as it were, in quotes, isn't a bad thing. Sometimes we need an extra nudge. It's always nice if there's a change we want to make, to do it before the universe makes you make the change. But ultimately, it's about prioritizing that storytelling. And if you have a way that's taken away from you, you will find another way to get the stories out. That's what I absolutely love about each of you, that it isn't necessarily what's happening externally when it comes to traditional publishing or some other thing. You've never stopped storytelling, right? And that's what's so important. That's what I want more writers to recognize. You know, you're a writer if storytelling is just, number one, part of how you process the world, which maybe there need to be more studies around this, especially with neuroplasticity. Like, is storytelling, there was a Joan Didion book, We Tell Ourselves Stories. What's the title? We tell ourselves, it's a favorite. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. And I feel that deeply.
Oh, well, that's one of the first things I would tell my students when I was teaching screenwriting. The very first foundation course that I taught was about why we tell stories as human beings. And it's just a fundamental part of being human. We tell stories every minute of every day in every conversation that we have. I think dolphins also tell stories. There's a couple of animals that tell stories, but human beings, we cannot survive without telling stories. We just don't realize we're doing it most of the time.
Yeah. But even if we go back to that original question, I love that each of you has a slightly different way of doing it, to differing levels of maybe feeling positive about your particular way. I think we always, by the way, strive to have it be cleaner or easier or better or less chaotic. But ultimately, if it's kind of working for you, it's totally okay if you're getting to where you want to go. But knowing that there is no one path, there's no one perfect software. By the way, the software doesn't write the story. And I know there's AI out there. Research it if you want, but I have heard some of the utter rubbish that AI comes up with when it is writing a story, and it is no match, because of course we've told it can learn, but it's not the same.
No,
right?
it's always a pale reflection, because one of the things I always say when I'm talking to writers is that I learned it from you, Ange, that the most important thing to do is to delve into yourself, because the best stories are the ones that are deep and they tell us something essential and true about being human. And a machine can't do that because it's not human.
Yeah.
So it can approximate it and copy it, but it's just recreating versions of things it's read. It's not ever finding its own, or at this point, and if it does, then it may become and it may destroy us. So let's not go there.
Yes, that's not.
And it's interesting what you were saying about finding the positives in the way you work, even if it's chaotic. Harking back to the talk about typing before and me working from a notebook, and maybe I should learn to touch type. The fact that I write a lot by hand first, the positive I take from that is when I do then transfer it over into my computer, it satisfies my editing brain. Yes. Because I give it a little edit as I write it. So I get to do that little kind of, that's why my first typed draft, first draft is clean. Yeah. Because I do that little edit as it comes out of the notebook.
You hear it, everyone, you're hearing it right here. This is her trick, and this is how she writes a clean first draft.
It's my secret.
Yeah.
It's not really a first draft.
But it still is. It still counts as the first draft. I think putting that extra energy in, and again, other people from outside can look at that and think, what a waste. But again, the reason we tell stories first is for ourselves. Right? So you are getting that catharsis in multiple ways from doing it the way that you're doing it. You could probably be faster, maybe another way, or maybe not. Maybe if you typed it straight in, you would have to spend more time somewhere else in changing it. Because to what you were talking about, Nina, about AIs not being able to hit that soul level, what we long for is truth. What we long for is connection. What we long for is being seen. And we have to see ourselves. And if we're not digging deep and we're just putting words on a page, there was that conversation we had in the past podcast, where we were talking about people who really churn out books. If they love it and they have readers who love reading it, that is great. And I think everyone deserves to have whatever life, as long as they're not impeding on others, they can do that. However, I think the majority of us are doing it for a deeper reason or a bigger reason. And so, I'm always going to tell writers, I want you to challenge yourself. Be at that place where you're a little bit nervous about putting that out, because that tells me you're sharing something that really needs to be shared, as opposed to the light and fluffy stuff. There's still going to be plenty of people who want that, but we are seeing more and more and more, especially everywhere with book sales, people wanting more truth, which can be fiction, and yet it's reflective of your experience. That means there's light and shadow. It's probably why the three of you two all have a sense of that shadow and light. The humor is in all of your writing for each of you. And you're also not shying away from some of the heavier topics, which is what's so resonant about your work. It's not just, and for listeners, I'm going up to my brain again, it's not just light, superficial stuff. Yeah, there's fun and humor, because we have to have humor to get through some of the crazy, we'll call it chaos. We'll be kind and call it chaos. But we've got to have some of that lightness to get us through. As somebody recently said, you've got to be able to see the ridiculousness of all of this to be able to make it through. And you're also not backing away from the other stuff. So when we talk about organizing thoughts, maybe it does take a little bit extra. Nina's got these different compartments or different rooms. I love the thought of that. Each story having a different room in your mind. And it's sort of like a fun house. Certain rooms sort of shift themselves forward when they are ready to be opened, but it's always living in there, developing. And Emma, you've got maybe multiple things opened, or it's just whatever screen opens on your computer at any given time, and then you give your attention to it. And I have faith that there's a deeper reason for it. And again, using, is it Dabble or Dabbler? Dabble. Just see if that works. If it doesn't take too much from you to learn how to use it to help you feel more connected and in control of your writing, but always leaving a little bit of wiggle room. And I know that there's plenty of that in your life. I don't worry about that.
We're in danger of losing that.
of having, no, you've got everything in full control. I mean, that doesn't exist, people. And then Rach with tons of notebooks. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, I would be screwed if my apartment burnt down because it doesn't exist anywhere else.
Although it did make me think too, to your worry, Emma, about like, what if the idea goes? I do think that if you never had the memory and it never went, it just never was meant to, a la Rach's, I'm going to just call them thousands of ideas. That's probably closer to truth.
You're not wrong.
just not written where she can see them at the moment. We're not doing a hard count, but some are meant to come to fruition and others aren't. And so part of that moving forward, I think some of the fear is I won't do the one that should be done, but that doesn't exist. It can't exist. If it is fully formed, then it will exist. And if it wasn't meant to, you will forget it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
we're making choices all the time. So we'll keep this kind of short this week. So hopefully people have gotten enough, whether it is an idea of a program or learning how to touch type, regardless of how old they've gotten. I mean, we're both sitting here 49, Rach, and we're the not touch typists in the group. Okay. But we could learn it if we wanted to, or saying, you know what, I'm kind of okay where I'm at, and I don't have to have it all locked down a particular way for me to go from start to finish. For those of you who are giving NaNoWriMo a go, try to have fun with it. Maybe if we can just have one comment from those who have done it, or I don't know, Rach, if you're going to try it this year, yay or nay.
Yeah. I think I'm going to do it this year. The rom-com I want to try, and I'm actually starting it today. This new joyful project. I'm going to take a step away from some of the difficult stuff and just write something that really makes me feel good. And this is whispering to me. So I'm going to start it today, and then I'm going to try to use NaNoWriMo to, crack it out.
I love it. And Emma, what would you say? I know you've done it at least once the full way through. What's your best advice for doing it?
I did it for the first teen novel that I wrote, and I got 3/4 of the way through it, and then my house flooded. Speaking of like
controlling everything,
it was flooding. The pipes in the ceiling burst, so it was raining through several rooms of the house. That threw me off a little bit. But at the end, at the end of that month, while I didn't manage to write in that last week, I did have something like, 40,000 words or something that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't thrown myself in. So even though it was incomplete, it didn't matter. And in order to fit that in around life and work and everything else that was going on, I just did it first up in the day. So got up not super early. I just made sure that I wrote before I started work. And that sort of is how I did it. And it really helped. And I'm going to give it another go this year.
I love that. What about you, Nina?
Just to be gentle with yourself, that if you don't make the 1,600 and whatever it is words in that particular day, don't tack them on to the next one. I tried that, and all it did was it made it really start to feel like a dead weight on my shoulders. And once I gave that away, I realised that, you're aiming for that number of words a day. If you don't make it, if you don't get to 50,000, don't beat yourself up. You still have a substantial amount of words there, and you should just enjoy the wins. Don't focus too much on the days that it rains inside your house.
Sometimes there are bigger other things that are happening, and it's okay to not write it's 1,667, which sounds absolutely crazy to me. Some people can get through it, but to what you were saying, Nina, and for any writer trying it the first time or the fifth time, whether you've succeeded or not, it is really about knowing that what you're saying by engaging is, I'm prioritizing this for myself, and I'd like to give it a go. And it's a month of discovery. Maybe it's discovering more about the story. Maybe it's discovering, actually, I don't like getting up early, and I'd rather, forego an hour of sleep at night. Maybe it's discovering that you want to do something else altogether. I don't know, or a totally different story. But going into it, as Nina said, giving yourself that self-compassion and not putting too much pressure on yourself, and just look at it as, ooh, what am I going to find out about myself or my writing process? You can make it a book. Emma has done it 100%. It can be done. But it isn't only done if you succeed and get those 50,000 words. You can still make a book out of it, no matter where it goes. So thank you guys so much, as always, for coming and chatting with me and sharing a lot about your process, and maybe sometimes things that you hadn't really thought of, with other writers and readers out there. And until next time, hopefully we will catch you on another episode of Writers Talking.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was lovely. See ya.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Writers Talking. Join us next time for more writers in conversation as we delve into the writer's process, their passions, and a little bit about their books. Don't forget to subscribe on your fave podcast player and follow us on Instagram at writers_talking_podcast.